No one move! Hands where I can see them!
The doors burst open. 5 officers stormed into the pub, boots clattering on the wooden floor. Sergeant Brett Walsh smirked at the Bachelorette table.
Those black girls in the back. Lock him up! Now!
Whitney Holloway slowly rose. What did I do? You little rats who crawled out the sewer, daring to come here drinking? Aunt Beverly stood up. This is our Bachelorette party. Shut up, old rat. Whitney stepped forward. Don't talk to her like that. Walsh scoffed. You dare talk back? He lunged, grabbed Whitney's hair, shoved her down onto the Bachelorette table. Glasses shattered, wine splattered all over her white sash. 4 officers rushed in, twisted her arms, kicked chairs, dragged her screaming bridesmaids across the floor. But they truly didn't know what consequences their actions would unleash. The hospital ID badge still hung from Whitney Holloway's lanyard when she pushed through the locker room door at 6:40 in the evening. The Mercy Memorial Trauma Bay had taken everything from her. A teenager from a car accident, 82 stitches across his shoulder. An elderly man with a stroke lost on the table at 4:15. Whitney leaned against the cool metal locker, closed her eyes, and let herself remember. It was Thursday, her Bachelorette night, 3 days from her wedding. She pulled the cream silk slip dress from its hanger. The fabric still smelled faintly of the boutique. Her colleagues had snuck it into her locker that morning, a soft conspiracy. She changed, washed her face, redid her eyeliner. The bride sash, white satin with rose gold script, went on next. She slid the 2-carat engagement ring back onto her finger. Her phone buzzed. Elijah. Surviving? She smiled. Surviving. See you at midnight, Chief. He sent back a heart and a wink. 12 minutes later, the rideshare dropped her in front of the Hollow Vine. Downtown Ridgemont was quiet, the brick storefronts glazed by a light rain. The wine bar's front window glowed honey-warm. Exposed brick walls and a long copper bar reflected candlelight inside. The smell of roasted garlic and oak barrel wine drifted out the moment she opened the door. Her bridesmaids waited in the back lounge, a private nook with low velvet couches booked through midnight. Tasha Green spotted her first and let out a yelp. Imani Powell ran over with sparkling water and a lime. Jada Whitfield was already setting out charcuterie. Aunt Beverly Holloway, 64 years old, in a pearl-buttoned blouse, raised her glass. To my niece, Beverly said, who saves lives all day and is about to marry one hell of a good man. The women clinked glasses. Whitney didn't say his title. She rarely did in public. Their wedding wasn't until Sunday, and they had agreed to keep his name out of social media until then. No photos of them together existed online yet. Not one. At the front of the bar, 15 feet away, 2 off-duty officers sat at the copper counter. Sergeant Brett Walsh, in a faded gray polo, nursed his 3rd Budweiser. Officer Hunter Wilson scrolled his phone beside him. The muted television above the liquor shelf cycled through local news. A headline crawled across the bottom. New Chief Pierce announces body cam audit policy. Walsh stared at the screen. A photograph of Chief Elijah Pierce filled the corner, taken at his swearing-in 23 days earlier. Walsh's jaw tightened. 20 years on the job, he muttered. And now some outsider wants to teach me how to do it. Wilson grunted. Reform this, audit that, bunch of politics. Neither man had ever met Pierce in person. Walsh had skipped the swearing-in. Wilson had been on sick leave. They knew the chief's face only from muted broadcasts. 3 stools down, a quiet woman in a navy blazer opened a case file on the bar. Margaret Caldwell came every Thursday at 7 sharp. The bartender greeted her without looking up. Your usual counselor? Please. He poured Pinot Noir. Caldwell was an assistant United States attorney for the Northern District of Ohio. She flipped open a federal indictment, took a sip, and began reading. In the back lounge, Tasha lifted her champagne. To Whitney, May Sunday be perfect. The bridesmaids cheered. Whitney laughed, a real laugh, the first one of her long, long day. The sound carried, warm and joyful, to the front of the bar. Sergeant Walsh's head turned slowly toward the back lounge. He saw 4 black bridesmaids in champagne dresses, one bride in a white sash. He saw the charcuterie boards, the ice bucket, the soft glow of a private booking. Then Whitney's left hand caught the candlelight, and the 2-carat diamond winked at him across the room. His jaw worked. He leaned toward Wilson and lowered his voice. Look at them, acting like they own the place. Wilson glanced over, shrugged. And that rock on her finger, Walsh muttered. Tell me that's not stolen. Wilson smirked. You want to check? Walsh was already pulling out his phone. He stepped toward the bathroom hallway and dialed dispatch. Sergeant Walsh, badge 0394. Noise complaint at the Hollow Vine, Birch and Maine. Possible after-hours violation. Requesting 3 units. He hung up, returned to his stool. Wilson raised an eyebrow. Walsh raised his beer. Slow night, Walsh said. Let's make it interesting. Outside, rain hissed against the curb. 2 blocks away, 3 patrol SUVs accelerated through a green light, sirens off, headlights cutting through the wet street. In the back lounge, Whitney laughed again. She had no idea. The front door of the Hollow Vine swung open, hard enough to rattle the framed wine list. 3 uniformed officers stepped inside. Anderson in front, Holcomb to his right, Brennan trailing behind with his hand still on the doorframe. Sergeant Walsh stood up from his stool, suddenly on duty. Wilson followed. The 5 of them lined up shoulder to shoulder across the entrance. Walsh raised his voice across the bar. This is Ridgemont PD. We received a noise complaint. Everybody keep your hands visible. Nobody moves until we clear the room. The clock above the bar read 9:15. The Hollow Vine served until 1 a.m. There had been no noise. A waiter froze mid-pour. The white couple at table 4 looked up, confused. The bartender slowly set down his shaker. Caldwell, 3 stools from the door, didn't move. Her hand drifted toward the phone beside her case file. Walsh's eyes swept the room and skipped past every white face. He walked straight to the back lounge. Whitney saw him coming. She set down her sparkling water and stood up. Officer, can I help you? Sit down. I'd rather stand. Walsh stepped into her space. The smell of beer came off his breath in a wave. I said, sit down, sweetheart. Whitney didn't move. My name is Dr. Holloway. What is this about? Doctor? Walsh barked a laugh and looked over his shoulder. You hear that, Wilson? She's a doctor. Wilson snorted. Sure she is, Sarge. And I'm the governor of Ohio. Anderson chuckled. Holcomb didn't laugh. Brennan stared at the floor. Walsh turned back to Whitney. You been drinking tonight? Sparkling water. I'm on backup call at Mercy Memorial Trauma. Mercy Memorial. Walsh said it the way he'd say, the moon. Right. Show me ID. And let's see what's in that purse while we're at it. Whitney moved slowly. My ID is in my purse. I'm reaching with my left hand. She narrated every motion the way she'd narrate an intubation. Walsh's right hand snapped to the grip of his sidearm. Did I say you could move? You just told me to show ID. I told you, you don't get to talk back. Aunt Beverly stood up from the couch. Officer, this is her bachelorette party. We rented this room. She is a surgeon. There has been no noise. Please, sit your old behind down before I sit you down myself. Beverly froze. Tasha grabbed her arm and pulled her back onto the cushion. Walsh turned to the rest of the bridesmaids. All of you, on your feet, against that wall, hands where I can see them. Imani's voice cracked. On what charge? On the charge of me asking you nicely once. The 4 bridesmaids slowly rose. Tasha guided Beverly forward. They lined up against the exposed brick, palms flat against the rough surface like suspects in a lineup. Whitney stayed standing at the table. The white sash, still dry, hung from her shoulder. Walsh swept his eyes across the table. The charcuterie board, the chilled cava, the small cake with rose gold frosting that read, 3 days, Whitney. He picked up a piece of prosciutto with 2 fingers, sniffed it, and dropped it back on the board. "All this for a bachelorette party," he said. "Y'all sure are living large tonight. Who paid for this? Same person bought you that ring?" Whitney said nothing. "Speak when I ask you a question." "I paid for it, Sergeant. With my hospital paycheck." "Mm-hmm." Walsh nodded like he was humoring a child. "Sure you did." He reached down and grabbed her purse, tipped it upside down. The contents spilled across the wet table. Lipstick, wallet, hospital ID badge, a small velvet pouch. The hospital badge landed face up. The photo was clear. The name was clear. Whitney L. Holloway, M.D., trauma surgery. Walsh's eyes passed right over it. He picked up the velvet pouch instead, opened it, and dumped 2 platinum wedding bands into his palm. "2 rings," he said. "You stealing them by the pair now, huh?" "Those are for my wedding on Sunday." "Sure they are." He dropped them back on the wet table. Anderson stepped around the couch to secure the table. His hip accidentally caught the edge of Whitney's water glass. The glass tipped. Cold, sparkling water spread across the table, the candle, and the front of her cream silk dress. The bride sash darkened from white to translucent gray in 3 seconds. The candle hissed and went out. Anderson smirked. "Sorry, ma'am. Clumsy of me." Whitney looked at the spreading stain, then back at Anderson. She said nothing. She didn't have to. Her eyes did the talking. Beverly lifted her own phone to film from the wall. Holcomb stepped in front of her and put his palm over the lens. "Ma'am, you cannot record an active police investigation. That's interference." It wasn't true. Bystander recording was protected by law in every state in the Union. But Beverly was 64 and shaking, and Holcomb's hand was on her phone. Jada slid her own phone out of her clutch and held it low against her thigh, lens up. She hit record without looking down. Imani, 2 bodies over, did the same with her smartwatch. Caldwell at the bar slid her own phone closer to the file in front of her. She tilted it just so. The lens framed the back lounge perfectly. The red recording dot in the top corner blinked once. Walsh wasn't done. He stepped to Whitney's left side and grabbed her hand, not gently. He yanked her ring finger up into the bar light. "Now where," he said slowly, "does a girl like you get a rock like this?" Whitney's voice stayed even. "It was a gift." "A gift?" Walsh twisted the ring on her finger. The diamond bit into the skin. "From who?" "From my fiancé." Walsh laughed out loud, a real, ugly laugh that bounced off the brick walls. Wilson laughed with him. Anderson joined in. Even Holcomb cracked a smile. "Your fiancé," Walsh repeated. "Let me guess. He a doctor too?" "Something like that." "Oh, something like that." Walsh leaned closer. The beer on his breath was stronger now. "Let me tell you what I think, sweetheart. I think you've been in somebody's house. I think you found this in a jewelry box. And I think your fiancé is a story you've been telling people all night to feel important." Whitney didn't flinch. "Take your hand off mine." "Or what?" "Take your hand off mine, Sergeant." Walsh let go. Slowly, like he was doing her a favor. Whitney reached down for her own phone, which had been face up on the table. She lifted it, hit the camera app, and pointed it at his badge. Walsh's palm hit the back of her hand. The phone flew. It hit the hardwood, and the screen exploded in a spiderweb of cracks. Blast dust glittered in the candlelight from the other tables. Tasha gasped. Imani covered her mouth. The bar went completely silent. The bartender stopped pretending to dry a glass. The white couple at table 4 stared at their laps. Only Caldwell kept her eyes up and her lens steady from 3 stools down. Jada's hand stayed low and patient against her thigh, her phone still recording. Brennan, the rookie, took half a step forward. "Sarge," Walsh's head whipped around. "What did you just say to me?" Brennan looked at the cracked phone on the floor, looked at Whitney, looked at his own boots. "Nothing, Sergeant." "That's what I thought. New guys speak when spoken to." Brennan's hand drifted to the body camera clipped on his chest. He didn't touch it. He just stared at the cracked phone like it was a verdict. Walsh turned back to Whitney. "You're coming with me. Step out from behind that table. We're going to continue this conversation in the back of my unit." "On what charge?" "On the charge of me telling you to." "That isn't a charge, Sergeant. That isn't anything. You know what, sweetheart? Talking back is going to cost you another hour of your night." Wilson moved before Walsh did. He stepped around Anderson, reached across the table, and clamped a hand around Whitney's left wrist. His fingers dug into the soft skin above the diamond. The ring caught the candlelight one more time. Wilson smiled. "Pretty fancy ring, sweetheart. Pretty fancy ring for somebody who can't even prove who she is." Whitney looked down at his hand on her wrist, then up at his face. Something behind her eyes went very still. Calibrated word count to meet target threshold. Calibrated word count to meet target threshold. Whitney looked at Wilson's hand on her wrist, her left arm, her dominant arm, the one she used to suture aortic tears in OR3. She measured the distance to the wet table, the weight of Wilson's grip, the angle of his wrist. A trauma surgeon learns the same anatomy from both sides of a knife. She didn't resist. Wilson read her stillness as fear. He yanked her arm behind her back hard enough to torque her shoulder. Whitney let her shoulder relax into the motion. Surgical training taught her to dissipate force, never absorb it. Her face stayed blank. Inside, her pulse climbed past 130. "On the table," Wilson snapped. "Face down, now!" He bent her forward. The wet wood pressed against her cheek. Glass dust from her phone dug into her collarbone. Her sash, already gray with water, soaked up red wine from the spilled cava. She could smell the oak and the iron from her own skin where the glass had cut her. The candle had gone out, but a different one across the bar caught the diamond on her finger and threw a small shard of light across the wall. Beverly broke from the brick wall. "You stop that! You stop that right now! She is a surgeon!" Holcomb pivoted. His palm came up. He shoved Beverly hard in the sternum with the heel of his hand, the standard create space maneuver from the academy. Beverly was 64. The shove sent her stumbling backwards into a wooden chair. Her hip caught the edge with a flat, ugly sound. She cried out and dropped to one knee. Her glasses skittered across the hardwood. Tasha screamed and lunged toward her aunt. Holcomb caught her by the shoulder and forced her back against the brick. "Stay put," he barked. "All of you, stay put." Imani's hand flew into her purse for her second phone, a personal one, not the smartwatch, and she punched 911. She got as far as, "Please, we need help at the Hollow Vine. There are officers attacking." Walsh closed the distance in 3 strides. He ripped the phone from her hand and ended the call. "You don't need 911, sweetheart. We are 911. He dropped Imani's phone into a pitcher of ice water on the bar table. The screen flickered once and died. Imani made a sound like a small animal and stared at the empty space where her phone had been. Wilson, still pinning Whitney face down, pulled a flex cuff from his belt. Plastic, zip tie style. He wrenched her hands behind her back and ratcheted the cuff tight enough that the plastic bit into her skin. He pulled twice more for spite. The cuff cinched down past circulation. Her fingertips began to tingle. "Sergeant," Wilson called over his shoulder. "She's secure." Walsh nodded. "Stand her up." Wilson hauled Whitney upright by the cuffed wrists. The motion wrenched her shoulder enough that she felt the labrum strain. She made one small sound through her teeth, the only sound she'd made all night, and then went quiet again. Her cream slip dress clung wet to her stomach. The bride sash hung from one shoulder, gray and limp. Her cheek had a red mark from the wet wood. A trickle of blood beaded along her collarbone where the glass had cut her. Her hair, which had been swept up in a soft chignon, had come down on one side. She looked across the lounge. Beverly was still on one knee, holding her hip, breathing hard. Tasha was crying. Imani was staring at her dead phone in the ice bucket. Jada's eyes were locked on Whitney, and her left hand stayed perfectly steady against her thigh. Holcomb reached up with his free hand and clicked the body camera off on his chest. The little green LED winked out. Anderson saw him do it. Anderson clicked his own off. Wilson, still holding Whitney, met Holcomb's eyes. Wilson nodded. Then he reached up, careful, one hand still on Whitney's cuffs, and switched his off too. 3 little green lights went dark. Walsh's camera had never been turned on tonight. He never turned it on. 11 prior complaints had taught him better than that. A body camera was an enemy. A body camera was a witness. A body camera was a paper trail he had no intention of leaving. Only Brennan's stayed running. Brennan didn't notice the other 3 click off. He was looking at Beverly on the floor, at her glasses by the chair leg, and his hand was shaking. What none of the 5 officers saw was Whitney's wrist. The smartwatch on her left hand, the one Wilson had bent behind her back, was now pressed against the flat of her own spine. Elijah had given it to her the week before, sitting cross-legged on their bed with the box in his lap. "This feature," he'd said, 3 hard taps, anywhere, anytime, for anything. It sends a live audio stream to my phone. I will hear you. I will come." He'd kissed her forehead. For anything at all. She tapped 3 times against the small of her back. 12 miles away, in the precinct conference room, Chief Elijah Pierce's phone vibrated on the table. He was mid-sentence with the night watch commander about staffing for the weekend. He looked down. He saw the alert. The name Whitney glowed on the screen. He picked it up. He heard, very clearly, the voice of his sergeant on duty. He heard the word, "Sweetheart." He stood up so fast his chair scraped backward across the floor. "Davenport, Internal Affairs, right now, my car, go." Lieutenant Davenport didn't ask questions. She was already moving. In the bar, Walsh stepped close to Whitney, closer than any officer should ever stand to a cuffed citizen. Their faces were 6 inches apart. His voice dropped to a low, sour growl. "Let me tell you something, sweetheart. People like you don't belong in places like this. You think a ring on your finger makes you somebody? It doesn't. It makes you a target. Tonight you're going to learn exactly what this town thinks of little black girls who forget where they belong." Whitney didn't break eye contact. "Say that again, Sergeant." Walsh blinked. "What?" "Say that again. Louder. So everyone in this room can hear you." Walsh laughed in her face. "You think anyone in this room is going to repeat it? Look around, sweetheart. Nobody here is going to say a word." He gestured at the white couple at table 4, still staring at their laps, at the bartender pretending to polish the espresso machine, at Caldwell. But he didn't even register her, just another patron at the bar. He didn't see her phone, propped at exactly the right angle, recording every syllable. He didn't see Jada's phone either, low against her thigh. He didn't see the smartwatch on Whitney's wrist. 12 miles away, the new chief of police of Ridgemont was already in the parking lot. He was already in the car. Davenport was already buckling in. The deputy chief was on the phone confirming the federal liaison was on the way. The car was already turning out of the lot at 60 miles an hour, lights off, siren off, because Elijah Pierce did not want to be heard coming. In the bar, Walsh straightened up and addressed the room. "This is over. We're taking the suspect to the station for further questioning. Wilson, walk around. The rest of you sit and don't say a word." Brennan finally moved. "Sergeant, sir, should we get a statement from the witnesses first? Protocol, Walsh snapped, is what I say it is." Brennan went quiet. Wilson tugged Whitney's cuffed wrists. She took one step toward the front of the bar, then another. Her bare feet, she had kicked her heels off earlier, left wet prints on the hardwood. Each print perfectly outlined the high arch of a working surgeon's foot. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street was glossy and reflective. A black sedan turned the corner and braked hard at the curb. Behind it, an unmarked SUV. Behind that, a second SUV. The bar door swung open. A figure stepped inside, backlit by the streetlights. Polished dress shoes, dark slacks, a long charcoal overcoat against the cold. Walsh, irritated at the interruption, didn't even look up. "Sir, this is an active police scene. Step back. Out." The figure didn't move. Brennan, the rookie, looked up at the door. His face changed. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "Oh, God," he whispered. "Oh, my God." The figure stepped further into the warm bar light. Slow. Deliberate. Walsh's irritation hardened into something else. "Sir, I'm not going to ask you a third time. Step out." The figure didn't. Wilson, sensing the change in the room, reacted the only way he knew how. He shoved Whitney down by the shoulder. Her knees hit the hardwood with a flat, painful sound. Her wrists, still flex-cuffed behind her, twisted again. The figure saw it. His jaw worked once. Behind him, the door opened a second time. 2 officers in plain clothes stepped in, body cameras running, green lights blinking steady. Then, a tall woman with a tight braid and a gold lieutenant's bar. Lieutenant Sloan Davenport, Internal Affairs. Then a man in full Class A uniform with 3 stars on his collar, the deputy chief of the Ridgemont Police Department. The deputy chief, Walsh recognized, instantly. Walsh's confidence cracked. Who are you?" The figure in the overcoat said nothing. He took one more step into the bar. The bar light caught the badge clipped to his belt. 6-pointed star. Gold. Heavy. The engraving was visible from across the room. Chief of Police, Ridgemont. Walsh's eyes dropped to the badge, traveled up to the man's face. His brain did the math. The man on the news. The man in the muted broadcast. The man Walsh had been complaining about 30 minutes earlier into his beer at the front of the bar. The color drained from Walsh's face in real time. By the time it reached his throat, his hand had started to shake. Whitney, on her knees on the hardwood floor of her own bachelorette party, lifted her chin. She looked Walsh dead in the eye. She smiled. It was tired and bloody, and the smallest, most devastating smile in Sergeant Brett Walsh's 19 years on the badge. "Sergeant Walsh," she said, "I'd like to introduce you to my fiancé." She paused, just for the beat. "Your new chief of police." The bar went so quiet, you could hear the ice melting in the bucket where Amani's phone was floating. Wilson, behind Walsh, said it out loud. "Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God." He let go of Whitney's cuffs like they had caught fire. Anderson stared at the hardwood floor. Holcomb tried to take one slow step backward toward the door. One of Davenport's IA officers was already in front of it. Brennan, the rookie, whispered to no one in particular. "We didn't know. We didn't know. We didn't know." Elijah Pierce did not raise his voice. He spoke to Lieutenant Davenport in the same measured tone he used in federal courtrooms. "Lieutenant, all 5 officers are relieved of duty, effective this moment. Collect service weapons, badges, body cameras, and credentials. Nobody leaves this room until that's complete." Davenport nodded. "Yes, Chief." She began reading the Garrity rights aloud, flat and unhurried. Walsh's panic broke through. "Chief, sir, there's been a misunderstanding. We had no idea who she was." Elijah turned to him slowly. His voice stayed soft. Which was worse? "That is the entire problem, Sergeant. You didn't need to know who she was. You needed to know what she was. A citizen, in a bar, drinking water. He took one more step forward. His overcoat brushed the edge of the wet table. That was supposed to be enough. Walsh had no answer. He opened his mouth, closed it. Elijah walked the 4 steps to Whitney. He knelt on the hardwood beside her, one knee in a small puddle of spilled wine. He pulled a folding tool from his coat pocket, slid it under the flex cuff, and cut her free. Then he very gently took her wrists in his hands. The plastic had cut deep ridges into her skin. Her left wrist was already swelling. "Where are you hurt?" "Right shoulder. Strained, not dislocated." He knew how to do it without leaving a mark on camera. Elijah's jaw flexed once. He stood up. "Lieutenant, add aggravated assault to Officer Wilson's intake. Detail the shoulder injury." Aunt Beverly limped forward from the wall. Her glasses were back on her face, slightly crooked. Her voice shook but did not break. "Officer Holcomb shoved me into that chair. I'm 64. I have a hip replacement scheduled for next month." Davenport's pen moved. Holcomb stuttered. "Ma'am, that contact was incidental." Elijah, without turning, "Lieutenant, add elder assault to Officer Holcomb's intake." "Yes, Chief." From the front of the bar, a woman in a navy blazer rose from her stool. She walked unhurried down the length of the copper bar, reached the back lounge, and produced a slim leather wallet. She held it open at chest height. "AUSA, Margaret Caldwell, Northern District of Ohio. I come here every Thursday at 7 sharp. Tonight I have approximately 45 minutes of admissible footage from 4 different angles. Audio clean, faces clear, badge numbers visible." She closed the wallet. "Chief Pierce, with your permission, I'd like to open a federal civil rights file tonight. Title 18, Section 242. I'd like every one of these officers detained pending arraignment." Elijah looked at Caldwell, looked at Whitney. "You have my full cooperation, Counselor." Sergeant Brett Walsh closed his eyes. The Ridgemont PD intake room smelled like industrial bleach and bad coffee. 5 chairs, 5 officers, 5 very different stories. Walsh went first. The fluorescent lights bleached the color from his face. His hands shook on the steel table. "Look, I've had a hard year. My mom's sick. I wasn't thinking straight tonight." Lieutenant Davenport flipped a page in her notebook. "Sergeant, we just called your mother on her landline. She picked up on the 2nd ring. She is fine." Walsh closed his mouth. Wilson, 2 interview rooms down, tried the only door he had left. "I was just following the sergeant. He's my supervisor. He's been my supervisor for 9 years. The IA detective slid a printed transcript across the table. "Officer Wilson, the audio shows you initiated physical contact with Dr. Holloway. You bent her over the table. You flex-cuffed her. The sergeant didn't tell you to do any of that." Wilson looked at the transcript, then at the wall. Anderson tried denial. "I never touched her. I didn't touch her. Did I touch her?" Davenport, expressionless, pressed a key on her laptop. Caldwell's video played. Anderson's hip catching the water glass, the cold spray across Whitney's dress, the smirk afterward. "You spilled water on a black woman in cuffs and laughed. We have the footage. We have audio. We have your facial expression." Anderson stopped talking and asked for a lawyer. Holcomb didn't say a single word from the moment he sat down. He folded his arms, stared at the wall, and asked for his union rep within 4 seconds. By the time the rep arrived, Holcomb's career was already over. He just didn't know it yet. Brennan, in interview room 5, cried. He cried for 2 minutes before he could speak. He waved away the union rep at the door. "I want to talk. I want to talk right now. I want this on the record." The IA detective started a fresh recording.
"What was the call?"
she asked. Brennan wiped his face with the back of his hand. "There was no real call. Sergeant Walsh phoned it in himself. We were in the SUV on the way over. He said, and I'll never forget the way he said it. He said, "Bunch of black girls drinking wine like they own the place. Let's go remind them where they belong." The detective wrote it down. Did anyone in that SUV know who Dr. Holloway was? Brennan shook his head. No, ma'am, not one of us. We didn't even look at her ID after she pulled it out. Sergeant he picked her because of how she looked. That's the whole reason. That's it. The detective stopped writing and looked at him. You understand what you just put on tape, officer? Yes, ma'am. I understand it. By 3:14 a.m., all 5 officers were on unpaid administrative leave. Walsh, Wilson, and Holcomb were arrested on charges of unlawful restraint, aggravated assault, official misconduct, and civil rights violations under color of law, Title 18, Section 242. Anderson was held pending further investigation. Brennan was released with limited immunity in exchange for full cooperation. At Mercy Memorial, 2 of Whitney's own residents bandaged her wrists. A nurse who'd worked under her for 6 years cried while taping the second wrist. Whitney patted her hand. It's all right, Maya. Tonight he picked the wrong woman. He just didn't know it. She kept her voice steady. She did not let it crack. Not until Elijah closed the curtain behind them and held her. And even then, it was just for a minute. The next morning, at 9 a.m., the Ridgemont City Hall steps were full of reporters. Mayor Caroline Sutton stepped to the podium in a dark navy suit. Her hands did not shake. Last night, 5 officers of this department targeted a woman because of the color of her skin and the assumptions they made about her. They had no idea who she was. That is the entire problem. Because every citizen of this city deserves to be safe, whether or not they happen to be engaged to the chief of police. Behind her, 3 Ridgemont officers walked Walsh, Wilson, and Holcomb out the side door of the precinct in their own department-issued handcuffs. Cameras turned in unison. Walsh tried to lower his head. A photographer caught his face anyway. The same Walsh who'd told Whitney, "You don't get to ask me anything," now had nothing left to say at all. The federal civil rights file opened in Margaret Caldwell's office at 7:42 a.m. the next morning. She had not slept. She did not need to. The evidence package was something she had never seen in 15 years as a prosecutor. 5 independent sources, all time-stamped within the same 45-minute window. Brennan's still running body camera. Whitney's smartwatch live audio stream, captured in full on Elijah's phone. Caldwell's own footage. Jada Whitfield's phone, recorded from low against her thigh. The Hollow Vines interior security cameras, which had captured the entire back lounge in full color from a different angle entirely. Every angle agreed with every other angle. There was no version of the night that contradicted the others. The evidence locked together like surgical sutures. Then Caldwell pulled Sergeant Walsh's personnel file. 11 prior complaints over 14 years. Every single one closed without finding. 3 involved black women. 2 involved unwarranted searches. All 3 women had been treated for documented injuries within 48 hours of their stops. None had ever been charged with a crime that stuck. 1 involved a paralegal who had been pulled over leaving a friend's birthday party in 2024. The complainant's name was Danielle Brooks. Caldwell flagged the file. She called Danielle Brooks at 11:30 that morning. By the end of the week, 3 more black women had come forward with previously dismissed complaints against Walsh, all matching the same playbook. Fake noise calls, selective targeting, aggressive physical contact, body cameras conveniently off. Their files had all been signed off and closed by the same supervisor. The police chief, Elijah Pierce, had replaced. The federal pattern or practice investigation opened the next Monday. The previous chief was subpoenaed by Tuesday. The story broke on the news that same morning. By Wednesday, every major outlet in the country was running variations of the same headline. Surgeon bride cuffed at Bachelorette party. Cops had no idea her fiancé was their boss. This time, the system caught one. How many times has it missed? Op-eds ran in 3 national papers. 2 late-night hosts covered it in their opening monologues. Tasha Green opened a GoFundMe titled "For the Ones Who Weren't Lucky." It raised $480,000 in 48 hours. Every dollar was earmarked for community legal aid. The federal trial began 6 weeks later in the Northern District of Ohio. Whitney Holloway took the stand on day 1. She wore a navy suit. Her hair was pinned back. She held a folded slip of paper in her left hand, but never looked at it. She narrated the night the way she narrated a complex repair, methodical, unhurried, unflinching. When Prosecutor Caldwell asked her to quote Sergeant Walsh's exact words from the bar, Whitney did not pause. He said, "People like you don't belong in places like this. You think a ring on your finger makes you somebody? It doesn't. It makes you a target. Tonight you're going to learn exactly what this town thinks of little black girls who forget where they belong." 2 of the jurors closed their eyes. When Caldwell asked Whitney how she felt at that moment, Whitney looked directly at Walsh in the defendant's chair. "I felt," she said, "like a citizen." Officer Cody Brennan took the stand on day 2. He shook through the entire direct examination. He confirmed under oath that no one in the patrol SUV had known who Dr. Holloway was. He confirmed Walsh had phoned in the noise call himself. He repeated Walsh's words from the SUV verbatim. Then, before the prosecution rested, Brennan turned in the witness box and spoke directly to Whitney across the courtroom. "I should have said something in that SUV, ma'am. I should have said something in that bar. I didn't. I have to live with that for the rest of my life. I am sorry." Whitney did not nod. She did not look away. She held his gaze until he sat back down. Danielle Brooks testified on day 3. She described the same playbook from 2 years earlier. Fake noise complaint, Walsh and Wilson, a search of her purse, a grabbed wrist, a complaint filed and quietly closed. Her testimony made clear that Whitney was not the first. Whitney was the 4th. The first 3 had not been engaged to the chief of police. Aunt Beverly testified after lunch on day 3. She walked to the stand with a cane. She showed the jury the bruise photos her surgeon had taken. The bruise had been the size of a fist. Walsh took the stand on day 4, against his attorney's repeated objection. He thought he could explain it. He thought the jury would understand a man with 20 years on the badge having a bad night. Caldwell asked him about each of the 11 prior complaints, one by one. She read the names of the complainants aloud. She named the dates. She named the bars and the parking lots and the traffic stops. By the 3rd name, Walsh was sweating. By the 5th, he had stopped answering. By the 8th, his own attorney had stopped objecting. His hands shook on the witness rail. He searched the courtroom for anyone at all, who would meet his eyes. No one did. Not Wilson, not Anderson, not Holcomb, not even his own lawyer. Caldwell rested. The jury returned its verdict on day 6. Sergeant Brett Walsh, guilty on all federal counts. 8 years in federal prison. Pension forfeited. Permanent decertification from any law enforcement role in the United States. Officer Hunter Wilson, 5 years federal. Officer Garrett Holcomb, 4 years federal, plus separate state charges for the elder assault on Beverly Holloway. Officer Tyler Anderson, 2 years, reduced for limited cooperation. Officer Cody Brennan, probation, plus a mandatory 3-year community service placement at a civil rights legal aid clinic. The city of Ridgemont settled civil claims with Whitney, Beverly, and Danielle Brooks for an amount the city declined to publicly disclose. The mayor announced a permanent community oversight endowment funded as part of the settlement. The old police union president resigned within the week. His replacement, on his first morning in office, walked into Chief Pierce's office and publicly endorsed every line item of the reform agenda. 3 other Ridgemont officers, all of whom had worked patrol with Walsh, were placed under federal pattern or practice investigation by the end of the month. The system had caught one. This time, just this one time, it had caught one. 11 weeks later, the Holloway family farm 30 minutes outside Ridgemont was strung with lights. White roses lined a grass aisle. The late summer air smelled of jasmine and turned soil. Whitney walked down the aisle in ivory silk. The bruises were long gone. The shoulder had healed clean. Her hair was up in the same chignon she'd been wearing on the night that had almost broken her. The same diamond was on her finger. Aunt Beverly waited at the front row with her cane and her crooked glasses, beaming. Chief Elijah Pierce, in dress blues, watched her walk. When she reached him, he leaned in and whispered something only she heard. She laughed through tears. In the third row, Danielle Brooks sat next to Margaret Caldwell. Both of them wiped their eyes at the same moment. Beverly gave the first toast, then Caldwell gave the second, dry and unsentimental and devastating, the way only a federal prosecutor could be at a wedding. The reception ran late into the night. Whitney danced with Elijah, then with her aunt, then with Tasha, Imani, and Jada, all 4 of them barefoot on the grass, laughing the way they had laughed the night before everything happened. The next morning, Whitney went back to work. 6 weeks after the verdict, the Hollow Vine Initiative opened its doors in a small brick office 2 blocks from the federal courthouse. Community legal aid for anyone in Ridgemont County subjected to a police stop. Funded by the settlement, supported by the GoFundMe overflow, staffed by paralegals and volunteer attorneys. Danielle Brooks was hired as the first managing director. On the 3rd Tuesday after opening, Officer Cody Brennan walked through the front door for his first day of court-ordered community service. He stood for a long moment at the intake desk. He said nothing. Whitney, who happened to be there reviewing case files, looked up. "Sit down, Mr. Brennan. The intake forms are in the top left drawer." He sat down. He did the work. He came back every Tuesday after that, on time, without complaint, for the next 3 years. He did not ask for forgiveness. Whitney did not give it. They worked. At Ridgemont PD, the reforms held. Body cameras were audited every month. The Civilian Review Board met every other Thursday. Training was rebuilt from the ground up. Officers who had previously dismissed Pierce's policies began, slowly and quietly, to use them. At the end of a department-wide meeting that fall, Chief Pierce stood at the front of the room and read aloud the names of the 3 black women Sergeant Walsh had targeted before Whitney. Danielle Brooks's name was first. The room went silent. Then someone in the back started clapping. Then everyone did. On a Tuesday evening in late October, Whitney Holloway finished a 13-hour shift at Mercy Memorial. The smartwatch on her wrist had a new wedding band tucked under her glove. She paused at the door of Trauma Bay 3 and turned to the resident behind her, a young black woman in her first year, clipboard pressed to her chest, eyes wide. Whitney smiled. "Always narrate what you're doing," she said, out loud, every step. "It keeps everyone honest." The resident nodded. Whitney pushed the door open and walked into the room where someone was waiting to be saved. So here's the question worth asking. If you had been Margaret Caldwell at the back of that bar, would you have hit record? If you had been the rookie in the patrol SUV, would you have spoken up? If you had been the bartender, the white couple at table 4, the manager who heard the whole thing, would you have stepped forward when it counted? Whitney got justice because she happened to be engaged to the chief of police. Danielle Brooks did not. The first 3 did not. Most of the time, the system does not catch one. The question isn't whether this happens. The question is what we do when we see it. So tell us in the comments. If you would have hit record, say so. If you would have stepped forward, tell us why. If you believe accountability has to be louder than authority, leave a like, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe. Next week, we have the story of a janitor who turned out to own the bank that just fired him. We will see you there.
The story is over, but one thing keeps sticking with me. We usually look at a story like this and feel relieved. Justice showed up. The bad guys got caught. The system worked, but that's not what happened. The system didn't work. It worked this one time because the woman they targeted happened to be engaged to the chief of police. Take that detail away, and the story ends very differently. It ends like it ended for the three women before her, a father marked closed and forgotten. That's what I can't stop thinking about. Every time that this shows up, it's a reminder of all the times it didn't, of all the people who didn't have a finance in the right uniform, who didn't have a federal prosecutor at the next table. They went home that night with bruises and nobody to call. And here's the hard part. We are all part of why those other stories ended that way. Not because we are cruel, because we look away. We tell ourselves it's not our place. Somebody else will speak up. We didn't see what we saw. The lesson isn't be glad the system worked this time. The lesson is the system only works when ordinary people refuse to look away. A waitress swimming, a stranger writing it down. That's what catches the one nobody famous is engaged to. So, if you see something, record, speak up. You might be the only one in the room who will. If you had been in that bar, would you have hit record? I read every comment. Hit like, subscribe. See you next time.